The crucifixion. The sun hung high in the sky as the soldiers led Jesus to a place ominously called Golgotha, place of a skull. The barren, rocky ground seemed lifeless, a fitting backdrop for the day's grim events. The air was thick with heat and dust, the shouts and jeers of the gathered crowd rising like a storm around him. Their anger was palpable, their voices harsh and unyielding as they surrounded the condemned. Upon arrival, the soldiers offered Jesus wine mixed with gall, a bitter concoction meant to dull the pain. He raised it to his lips, but, after tasting it, he refused to drink. His choice was deliberate, his resolve unwavering even in the face of unimaginable suffering. The soldiers wasted no time. They laid the heavy cross down on the ground. Its rough wood splintered and stained, and roughly forced Jesus onto it. Nails were driven through his wrists and feet, each strike of the hammer splitting the air with a sickening crack. The pain was excruciating, but Jesus remained silent, his body trembling under the strain. The soldiers worked efficiently, their faces impassive, treating their task as mere routine. Once he was secured to the cross, they lifted it upright. The wood groaned under the weight, and with a harsh thud, it was set into place. Jesus hung there, his battered body exposed to the elements, and to the unrelenting scorn of the people below. Above his head, the soldiers fastened a crude sign, written as both mockery and declaration. "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." The soldiers then turned their attention to his garments. They stripped him, tossing his clothing into a pile before dividing it among themselves. To decide who would take what, they cast lots, the casual nature of their gambling underscoring the cruelty of the scene. Once finished, they sat down near the cross to keep watch, their eyes indifferent as if overseeing just another execution. 2 other crosses stood beside Jesus, bearing 2 robbers condemned to the same fate. One hung on his left and the other on his right, their bodies writhing in agony. Yet even in their suffering, they joined in the mockery, hurling insults at him alongside the crowd. Those who passed by wagged their heads, their scorn written clearly across their faces. "You who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself," they shouted, their voices dripping with derision. "If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Their laughter rang out, sharp and cruel, as they taunted him. The chief priests, scribes, and elders stood among the crowd, their satisfaction barely concealed. They, too, joined in the mockery, their words cutting like daggers. "He saved others," they sneered, their voices loud enough to carry over the din. "He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe in him." They turned to each other, their mockery feeding their sense of superiority. "He trusts in God," one of them said with a smirk. "Let God rescue him now if he delights in him, for he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" The crowd, whipped into a frenzy, grew more vicious. Some hurled stones, their hands grasping at whatever they could find to inflict more pain, while others spat in his direction. Their anger burned like wildfire, consuming reason and mercy alike. Yet through it all, Jesus bore the abuse in silence. His head hung low, blood from the crown of thorns trickling down his face. His body was racked with pain, but his gaze remained steady, his focus fixed on a purpose far beyond the understanding of the crowd that mocked him. The soldiers, the robbers, the priests, the crowd, they all shared in their scorn, their voices blending into a cacophony of hatred. But in the midst of their anger and derision, Jesus stood apart, not because of what he said, but because of what he endured. His silence spoke volumes, a testament to his unfathomable strength and divine purpose. The sky began to change as the 6th hour approached, the light of day retreating into an unnatural darkness. It was as though the heavens themselves mourned, the sun withholding its warmth and brightness. The air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension that pressed down on everyone present at Golgotha. The crowd, their voices still filled with scorn and mockery, began to falter in their cruelty as the eerie gloom spread across the land. Jesus hung on the cross, his body battered and broken. Blood mingled with sweat as it streamed from the wounds that covered him. His head sagged, the crown of thorns piercing deeper with every movement. The silence of the gathering was broken as the 9th hour came, when Jesus cried out with a loud voice. His words pierced through the heavy air. "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" The cry was raw and filled with anguish, his voice carrying the weight of his suffering. The meaning, my God, why have you forsaken me?" resonated deeply, a declaration of pain both physical and spiritual. Some of the onlookers misunderstood him, their mockery sparking once again. "This man is calling for Elijah," they exclaimed, their jeering laughter masking their unease. One among them hurried forward, grabbing a sponge and soaking it in sour wine. With a reed, he lifted it to Jesus' lips, offering him the bitter drink. Others stood back, watching with twisted anticipation. "Let us see whether Elijah will come to save him," they said, their voices dripping with cruel amusement. But then, Jesus cried out once more, his voice echoing through the darkness with finality. His spirit, yielding to the weight of the moment, departed. His head fell forward, his body limp upon the cross. Silence followed, an oppressive, deafening silence as the crowd held their breath. In that moment, the earth trembled violently. A great earthquake shook the land, the ground cracking open with an ear-splitting roar. Rocks split apart as if cleaved by an unseen hand, their jagged edges exposed. The crowd began to scatter, their anger turning to fear as the chaos unfolded around them. Panic surged through their ranks, their mocking cries now replaced by shouts of terror. In Jerusalem, the veil of the temple, the sacred barrier between the Holy of Holies and the rest of the temple, was torn in two from top to bottom. The sound of the tearing reverberated like thunder, its symbolism unmissable. The division between man and God, broken by the sacrifice that had just occurred. The tombs outside the city cracked open, the stone chambers releasing their hold on those who had rested within. Saints who had fallen asleep in death were raised, their bodies restored. After Jesus' resurrection, they would enter the holy city, appearing to many and bearing witness to the extraordinary power of this moment. The centurion and the soldiers keeping watch over Jesus stood frozen, their faces pale as the realization struck them. The ground still trembled beneath their feet, their hands gripping their weapons tightly. The centurion's voice, filled with awe and fear, broke the silence. "Truly this was the Son of God!" The admission was raw and heartfelt, spoken by a man who had seen what no human could deny. At a distance, the women who had followed Jesus from Galilee stood watching. Among them was Mary Magdalene, her heart breaking as she looked upon the one she had loved and served. Beside her was Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, her tears streaming down her face as she clutched her chest in sorrow. And there was the mother of the sons of Zebedee, her hands trembling as she grieved for the man she had come to believe in. The darkness seemed to deepen around them, each of their hearts weighed down by the horror of what they had witnessed. Their grief was palpable, their anguish unbearable. They had ministered to him, followed him, loved him, and now they saw him crucified, his life taken by the hatred and anger of the crowd. The remorse in their hearts was overwhelming, their tears falling to the dusty ground as they mourned. The earth eventually stilled, the sun began its hesitant return, but the weight of what had transpired remained. Fear coursed through those who had mocked him, the realization of his divine nature shattering their confidence. And for those who had loved him, the sorrow would linger, their hope and faith trembling, but not extinguished. Jesus is buried. Evening descended upon Jerusalem, the sky painted with hues of fading light as the city fell into a somber stillness. The events of the day had left an unshakable heaviness in the air, the kind that clung to the hearts of all who had witnessed the agony at Golgotha. Amid the quiet, a man stepped forward, Joseph of Arimathea, a rich and respected member of the community. He had kept his faith in Jesus discreet, following as a disciple in silence, but now he could remain silent no longer. Joseph approached Pontius Pilate, his steps deliberate and his face etched with sorrow. Inside the governor's chambers, Pilate sat in his seat of authority, his expression a mix of weariness and irritation. The weight of the day clung to him as well, the cries of the mob still echoing in his mind. Their fervor against Jesus, relentless, angry, and bloodthirsty, had unsettled even the seasoned governor. Though Pilate had sought to distance himself from the guilt, washing his hands of the matter, he could not shake the feeling that he had been forced to condemn an innocent man. "Governor," Joseph began, his voice steady though heavy with grief, "I have come to ask for the body of Jesus. Let me take him to be buried." Pilate regarded him for a long moment, the request weighing on his conscience. Though he resented the manipulations of the chief priests and the crowd's uncontrollable rage, he also wished to put the matter behind him. With a reluctant nod, he granted Joseph's request. "Take the body," Pilate said, his tone curt but not unkind. "Do what you will." Joseph left quickly, his heart pounding with a sense of purpose. Gathering supplies, he returned to the hill where Jesus had been crucified. Carefully, with great reverence, he removed the lifeless body from the cross, his hands trembling as he worked. Blood still marked Jesus' brow where the crown of thorns had rested, and his body bore the scars of unimaginable suffering. Joseph's tears fell silently as he wrapped the body in clean linen, ensuring that every fold and placement reflected his deep respect and love. Nearby, Mary Magdalene watched in anguished silence, her hands clutching tightly at her robe. Her eyes, red and swollen from weeping, never left Jesus' body as Joseph worked. Beside her stood the other Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, her face pale and drawn with grief. The two women felt as though their hearts had been ripped from their chests, their sorrow so profound it was almost unbearable. They had followed him, ministered to him, and believed in him, and now they stood in the presence of his lifeless form, their tears mingling with the dust. Joseph carried Jesus to a tomb he had prepared for himself, a new tomb hewn into the rock, a place of quiet dignity. Gently, he laid the body within, his hands lingering for a moment as if reluctant to let go. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary followed, their silent presence a testament to their unwavering devotion. They stood opposite the grave, watching as Joseph rolled a large stone against the entrance. The sound of the stone grating against the rock was final, a barrier sealing their beloved away. Their tears fell freely as they sank to the ground, their grief overwhelming. The next day, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered before Pilate once more, their faces set with determination. "Sir," they began, their voices tinged with disdain, "we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I am to rise again.'" Pilate, seated again in his chamber, sighed heavily. He had little patience left for their scheming, yet their persistence wore him down. "Therefore," they continued, "give orders for the grave to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, 'He is risen from the dead.' The last deception will be worse than the first." Pilate narrowed his eyes at them, their paranoia both exasperating and exhausting. Deep within, he felt a twinge of regret for the role he had played in their charade of justice, but his authority had been undermined enough already. "You have a guard," he said sharply, his voice laced with irritation. "Go, make it as secure as you know how." The chief priests and Pharisees wasted no time, taking soldiers to the tomb. Together, They worked to secure the site, setting a seal upon the stone and positioning guards to ensure that no one could approach. The stone that had been rolled with such care and sorrow by Joseph now bore the weight of suspicion and fear. As night fell once again, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary remained, their hearts heavy, as they lingered near the tomb. Grief coursed through them, their minds unable to comprehend a world without the man who had changed their lives. They held each other for comfort, their whispered prayers and tears their only solace. Yet in the depths of their sorrow, a flicker of hope remained, hope that, perhaps, his words would not return void.